Shmakian, and I'm a partner in law firm Nichols Lew, and I'm also the president of the PubK group. So it was pretty easy for me to get the two organizations together to co-host this webinar. This is the second webinar we've done on the topic. We did one week ago Monday, and keep the links handy, pay attention to what's going on. We're going to be hosting additional webinars over the next couple of weeks, and we'll try to give you more than 24 hours notice when we schedule them. To mention, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available to everyone who's registered for today's session. And feel free to distribute the recording to others who would be interested. We'll also make the slides available as either as part of the recording or as a separate attachment with the recording. We'll also post the information up on both the PubK site as well as the Nichols Lew site as well. A number of you have provided us with some questions in advance. We appreciate those. We'll do our best to try to address them during the presentations. We've got a long list of speakers here, and really appreciate everybody making themselves available on very short notice. But during the course of the day, during the course of this webinar, we'll also try to monitor both the chat function as well as the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So feel free to use those, and we'll do our best among the speakers and myself to get to as many questions as we can. If we're not able to get to all of the questions before the session is over, we'll do our best among the speakers to get you some answers, and we'll post those answers along with the recording as well. So what do we hope to cover? Here's the list of speakers. We've got four of us from Nichols Lew, myself, Robert Nichols, who's a partner, Jeremiah Centralia, who is our partner, does a lot of work with the NGO community. Our senior advisor is Robin Rafel. Robin is a former ambassador and assistant secretary of state for South Asia, and an extensive career working in the foreign policy arena, and has been an invaluable aid to us in these crisis times, not only here with Afghanistan, but some of the other work that we've been doing. So we appreciate Robin's continued support. In addition, we've got a great lineup of outside speakers who've joined us. You see some of the pretty names there. My good friend Doug Brooks, I'm glad to have him with us. Bo Cooper is the managing partner of government strategies and compliance at Fragomen's Washington, D.C. office, one of the preeminent immigration firms. Bo was also the former general counsel for the U.S. Immigration and Nationalization Service. So we appreciate Bo joining us. Mike Kelly is a senior advisor at AHT Insurance Brokers and a partner and risk advisor there. Done a lot of work supporting government contractors in the NGO community, and really appreciate him. And then we've got both Will and Mitch Shivers. Will is the CEO of Regulus Global, and Mitch is a former senior DOD and State Department official. We appreciate both of them joining us today. Both of them have been heavily involved in the current efforts to extract U.S. citizens and others from Afghanistan, and we look forward to their comments. We've created a resource for everybody. So there are a couple of things for your information. This is the two client alerts that we've published from Nichols Lew, one on the 16th, one on the 24th, just on Tuesday, regarding the Taliban sanctions, and Jeremiah will spend some time talking about that. On the 16th, we published an alert on what contractors can do to minimize risk. There are two resource pages that you might want to bookmark. One is that we've established on the PubK site, the PubK resource page, and there's the link to that. Also, our friends at the Professional Services Council have established an Afghan Resource Center, and I provided a link to that PSC along with Interaction and many of the other organizations. are talking regularly with U.S. government officials, as are we, and many of the information requests and updates are provided via these associations. And PSC is doing a great job of making that available on their resource page. Let me go to the agenda. So I've already talked about that, about the resource page. I want to touch briefly on some of the lobbying activities that are going on, and be on slide 6. So what we're doing here is really continuing to undertake extensive outreach on behalf of both the evacuation assistance as well as for contractors and NGO members around a wide range of issues. And that lobbying activity engages not only the executive branch agencies, but the congressional members and staff as well, on both foreign relations and foreign affairs committees, the armed services committees, and individual members who are interested. We encourage you to, we've been in touch with many of you, many of our members, many of the clients that we have at Nichols Lou. But we encourage all of you to share information with us. You can contact any of us at the firm. Our contact information is at the end. Call, write, come by and visit. Let us know what areas are of interest to you. And if you're interested in joining the coalition that we're putting together, we'd love to hear from you, keep you informed about the actions we're taking, the issues we're raising, and that's going to be an ongoing activity. Because while we deal with the immediate crisis, we're also mindful that this is going to be an issue for the long haul, not only around getting people out and getting people out safely, but also what are the implications then over the longer term, over the next 60, 90 days for both the contractors, contractor employees, and the NGO and beneficiaries of the U.S. government's assistance. So we're working across sectors, we're working across the aisle with others, and we welcome hearing from you directly, both in your participation and as importantly, in the issues. Our goals are to make sure that contractors get their costs covered, the cost that they've incurred because of the inability to continue work and the cost incurred because of the emergency situations. Tort liability, we're looking at that. We're looking at insurance issues, and you'll hear a little bit of some of those issues today as well. And finally, it's going to be important to focus on the ability of the U.S. government agencies to reprogram funds. Many of you have experience with that. Some of you may not. We've got some expertise, and we're drawing on the expertise of others to help us focus on the reprogramming of funds so that the maximum amount of funds can be made available to support the ongoing activities as well as for the longer term. That's the end of my monologue. Let's go next to talk about the evacuations. For that, I want to turn it over to my partner, Robert Nichols. Robert?
Thank you. I've heard from quite a number of clients this week who are trying to evacuate personnel. I think most Americans are out. Most third-party nationals are out, although, obviously some remain. The big focus, I think, now is getting out Afghans who assisted the U.S. government. And that is turning into quite a difficult proposition. Everybody's aware of what's gone on there with the airport the last couple of days in terms of the threats of people going in and out, the clogging of the system going in and out, and the U.S. government not really giving very good information or assistance. We're hopeful that at some point the U.S. government will take an increased role in continuing to evacuate. But we're also aware that there are private efforts to evacuate. So we have on the phone today, or on this webinar, 3 people who have been very, very deeply involved in these evacuations. And I'd like to ask each of them about their experiences and what they're seeing, what they're hearing from their government counterparts, and any advice that they have going forward. The first person I'll introduce is Mitch Shivers. Mitch and I have known each other for quite a few years, heavily involved in Afghanistan together. Mitch used to have, used to be a senior DoD official with Afghanistan in his portfolio, and also closely worked with the State Department on Afghanistan, and has been one of the only folks I know that has helped facilitate a successful airlift so far. So Mitch, can you give us a sense of what you're hearing from your government counterparts and what you have seen work and not work so far?
Well, thanks, Robert. I'd like to preface my remarks by saying all of us involved in the early stages of an emergency like this, whether it be civil or military, very much have what's called a soda straw view of the event. It's very hard to have a broad perspective and fully incorporate all of the inputs that are out there. So depending upon what you're working on, I'm hopeful others will agree with me. You can have quite a narrow view of what's happening. So for instance, I've been heavily involved with two of the private sector charter groups. And when you're working those charters, they're so complex that you really have very little attention for other things. And big things can be happening all around you. For instance, the Mill Air airlift is really incredible. I mean, they're moving tens of thousands of people. But if you're in the private sector space, relatively little is happening because the powers or the authorities are very opaque. They do that for good reason, operational security, but it prevents us from getting a quick view and accurate information. So a lot of the experience here has been collecting data points and moving forward as best possible, reacting to events as well. So changes in gates, the myriad of details that it would take. Bear in mind, I think we're doing this actually since the 16th. So a tremendous amount of organizational effort has gone into getting charters off. There are charters off. There's still some charters that are going to go off later today. And I don't have a good view of exactly how many have gone off. There have been rumors all throughout of charters successfully landing and taking off. But I know charters that have done that with half passengers because of the problems with manifests and everything. Let me just talk about the conditions that we're in right now. One charter group that I was working with, really providing some extra bandwidth and being a principal contact with the State Department and my old office at DOD. Robert mentioned I was at DOD. I was a acting assistant secretary there for Indo-Pac, which is the entire area, starting with Afghanistan, going all the way out through the Pacific. And prior to that, I was the principal deputy, and then prior to that, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Central Asia. So I've had 17 years of contacts, and like many other people, I'm trying to get folks out. And this is one of the problems with the current exit, is that literally thousands of people in the United States are trying to get people out, and that's clogging the system up. So getting a POC, getting somebody at the State Department or DOD to react to you is difficult. The conditions now, the government's on alert. They are expecting additional adverse events. Hopefully they won't be as tragic as the ones yesterday. The approaches remain dangerous. It's clogged. The city of Kabul itself is relatively quiet and peaceful. It's as you do the approaches and attempt to go through the gates that all the chaos and mayhem is happening. The Taliban have put in, as a result of yesterday, increased checkpoints and more stringent checkpoints than they've had. So that's creating another obstacle. So the one charter that I'm involved in has got 5 buses near the airport, but can't get through the Taliban checkpoints, even with US cooperation. You've heard, that they're exchanging information and things like that. So we continue to, the government's got a high priority right now on various categories, as you would imagine: American citizen, green card, SIVs, P1s and P2s. I'd say that I don't expect a lot of SIVs, P1s and P2s to make it. I think the window is closing. The government has said they're going to continue to move Afghans so long as there are military in Kabul. So the last flight may have some Afghans on it, but the window is certainly closing, and I'm suggesting that we're really in the contingency phase now. I'm looking forward to other panelists telling me that I'm wrong, and they're more optimistic. I think some privately organized efforts might still get going, because there's always the possibility in a setting like Kabul, the dynamic setting Kabul is right now, that a deal could be struck to expedite people to the airport. And the US, one of the things that was delaying getting people into the airport was the amazing backlog of people stuck in the airport. And they couldn't go to other destinations because places like Qatar had been full. I think some of that's being cleaned out now. And so I would caution you about giving up. Although I think we're going into the contingency stage, I think you should continue to be proactive with your teams on the ground if you have people going out. If they're P1s and P2s, it's a lot less likely than they are to get support going out than an SIV. SIV, of course, less likely than the green card and the American citizens. I don't really think there's a lot of American citizens that haven't gotten out that want to get out. And there's because of dual citizenship, there's a lot of American citizens that may be willing to stay. So does that kind of give you a backdrop, Robert?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate that. Doug, are you back? Doug had to take another quick call. Will, let's turn to you. Will Summerdijk is the CEO of Regulus. Regulus is a contractor that has worked very extensively with special operations with the US government, and has, on a humanitarian basis, turned his focus toward helping with the evacuation. I know that there are a number of sort of special operations related people who are helping with this, not necessarily all as humanitarians, but Will is one of the good guys here. Will, can you talk about your experience so far?
Sure. I think Mr. Shivers covered it incredibly well. We were initially brought into this just to get cargo and private planes and get them into the area. But as things got more complicated, we were definitely brought in to do a lot of other things as well. I think you summed it up very well. Our biggest challenge to date, at least for the last 72 hours, has been the gate problem. It doesn't really matter who you know and how high up that person is. Getting into a gate has been incredibly difficult. So even trying to do a ground game, which we have people on the ground, it does not matter if you have a plane in the airport, you can't get them in the door. It doesn't do you much good. So it's just, it's been a lot of coordination, a lot of variables that change on an hour by hour basis. But, for us, we've done a lot of challenging things in challenging environments. this one ranks up towards the top.
So, Will, if I understand the process that has happened, people meet at rallying points. They get on buses. There's a caravan to go in. They get checked in through a gate. They get into the airport and they get a flight, either on an ad hoc basis or they're on itinerary for a particular flight. But the choke point has been getting past the airport gates. Is that right?
Well, I would say that has been the most challenging choke point, at least in the last few days.
Okay.
Getting planes in, even, the insurance issue on planes and stuff hasn't been too much of a problem. There are planes available. And getting PPRs to get there, everything's run fairly smoothly outside of just being able to get them in the gate. And obviously being cautious about the security of everybody. We're incredibly careful not to put people on the roads and put them towards the gate unless we have a level of comfort that we can get them there safely. And then when we get to the gate that they can get in. So it's, but as of yesterday and everything else, every hour offers a different challenge that you got to work around.
Yeah. At what point will should or are people giving up on the Kabul airport and trying to go to other airports or leave by road?
I've heard a lot of that, particularly in the last 48 hours. I know we've looked into a lot of that, but that offers an even more complex challenge for a number of various different reasons. So I think right now everybody is just still focused on while we still have, the U.S. military there and everything else, it's do whatever we can to get out of Kabul airport. And then when that does not become an option anymore, then maybe start to take serious some of the other options that you mentioned.
Yeah. And,
Can I jump in, Robert?
yeah, please.
Without the military cover, it's very difficult to. The Taliban control the airspace, so the routes and everything that planes. If you're suggesting a private sector effort for Mazar or Herat, impossible to get the air clearance into the country from the Taliban. They're controlling it. And one of the problems that we've had on Milair from Kabul is that there's a very narrow corridor that the U.S. military can use. So the prospects of getting out otherwise are really ad hoc efforts. I would say there might be some special ops efforts to get really high value evacuees out, and they could be done surreptitiously and carefully, but I don't think anything that would probably interest the participants on this webinar.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Doug, I see.
Also, the road system is still pretty basic in Afghanistan. So the Taliban are doing everything they can to put up checkpoints all throughout the country. So if you were trying to go from Kabul or Mazar out of there, they know how how to stop those pathways.
Yeah, thank you. Doug, I see that you're back. I'm not sure how much you heard, but can you tell us what your experience has been so far?
Yeah, just so I'm working with FGI, which is a Afghan-owned UAE-based company, and we're doing charter flights, but mostly right now local ground movements in Kabul and Afghanistan. Initially, we did offer overland to Pakistan. We did not do any of those trips, but at that border, the Taliban had shut down the border for Afghans, but was allowing internationals across the border there. I don't know if that's still true, and the photos of the border look just as chaotic as Abbey Gate was the other day. We're looking at Mazir. There are actually, I think, still regular CAM Air flights going in Mazir, and I understand you can get, you can book some, I think they're Tajik contractor flights or charter flights. So that may be possible. We had, FGI had one of its employees drive down from Mazir yesterday and it was clear of Taliban checkpoints. There's no guarantee that'll stay. The intel we're hearing is that the Taliban are collapsing on Kabul right now, which is great for us. So for the moment, it looks like you can get up there. Also, inside Kabul, our buses are not being stopped for whatever reason. They're being turned away from HKIA a lot, but they're not actually being searched or anything. They're searching cars much more than they are buses. However, one little footnote to that, the Hazara have in fact faced persecution when they're driving buses. And one
Any
thing we need
tips?
to discuss is how to get Hazara out of the country, because they are definitely in the sights of the Taliban.
That's good. Any tips on getting through the gates, Doug?
Okay, well, I think you probably heard about the airfield's closed right now. They built actually a special gate on the north for buses, and which they used for a day very effectively. A lot of buses were able to get people out that way. That has been closed apparently permanently. Possibly the south gates have been closed permanently too. We don't know, but nobody's very optimistic here. We're hoping we get another day's worth of trips out, but right now it doesn't look like any more are going today. So it may be closed off permanently at this point. I mean, most of the gates have been welded shut and earthen berms pushed up against them as they prepare for an incursion. So,
Wow. Remarkable. All right. So
also,
let's.
just one other thing. Apparently, it's only military flights going in was announced, and I think yesterday there was one C-130 that took directed fire and multiple hits as it was leaving. So even if you could get charter aircraft in, I can't imagine what the insurance would cost. But
Yeah.
be
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you for that discussion on evacuations. I know it's an unsatisfying discussion for everybody, but it is what it is. And I think, as Alan said, we will continue to try to be an information clearinghouse to the extent possible on those issues. Okay, well, let's skip around a little bit and go right to immigration. Let's see, who do we have here? Bo Cooper from Fragaman, probably, in my view, the best firm on these issues. Bo is, as Alan said, former general counsel of INS and working to lead Fragaman's Afghanistan, I think, working group. Is that right, Bo?
Yeah, that's correct. And thank you, Robert, and thank you, Alan, for the invitation to join today. And thanks all of you who are on. My soda straw view onto all this is on Afghans who are at risk in most cases because of their connection with a U.S. entity, ranging from governments to U.S.-based NGOs to U.S.-based media organizations and so on. The immigration issues are not by far the core issue right now. The core issues are all the evacuation ones that have been described by earlier panelists. Getting out is critical, and I don't have a view on options between now and the close down that are more optimistic than those that Mitch described. But it is the case that there are a lot of Afghans who are at risk because of connections with U.S. employers who are at various points in that pipeline. There are small percentages that have been able to leave the country and are actually en route to the U.S., sometimes through military bases, sometimes through third countries. But most of the people in the situation I described just now remain in Afghanistan, and I do think that there will be, even though I think that the window for departure under the kinds of mechanisms that have been described by other panelists is closed or closing to most of these people. It will be the case that there will continue to be private efforts between now and the days ahead, and also I think there will be organic efforts that arise in the weeks and months ahead for people in this situation to get out. I think the bottom line from my perspective is that there are a number of complex and overlapping paths through the immigration system for those people who are aiming to get to safety in the U.S. And it's critical to be alert to those and to try to get onto those paths as quickly as possible as they play out. even for those people who have not, at least as important for those people who have not yet been able to leave Afghanistan, but who hope to find some way to do so. Most people who come into the U.S., unless you're in that special immigrant visa process that others have described, or if they make it to the U.S., are not going to have a basis to you've got to have a way to enter the country. You've got to have a way to stay in the country. You've got to have a long-term basis to be here. You need a way to be employed. You need a way to bring family members if that's possible. And those questions all depend on having an immigration strategy. I think there's two things that are important to say about the government's approach to this right now. The first is, let's put aside whatever criticisms we all might have about level of preparation and where they should have been on these kinds of plans so far. That's an important but separate discussion. I think there are two important things about where the government is right now on these immigration paths. One is that they are laying the track as the train hurtles forward. So much of this is being developed on the fly. But the second thing, the corollary to that is, it is my impression, based on some fairly close contacts with the immigration agencies, that they are doing their good faith best to make that set of tracks workable. Just to give a quick glance at the kinds of ways to come into the U.S. Obviously SIVs are the ones that people are most talking about for certain Afghans who worked for the U.S. government or military. That comes with a zillion complexities. The opportunities for contractors and subcontractors are broader in some instances for most government entities than they are for those who worked with the military. And also it can make a very significant difference how far along you are in that SIV process, ranging from approval to an early or recent or would-be applicant. But that's a very sturdy path to all the kinds of immigration stability I described just a moment ago, if you can be on it and get to its end. There's something called, I think Mitch made reference to the P2 and P1 process earlier on. Those are access routes into what's called the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program. And the P refers to priority levels. P2s are for people who fall into certain selected categories of people who can get access to the program. P1, priority one, is for people who, because of their individual circumstances themselves, can be referred into the program. But it's a long and complex one. You have to show that you meet a fairly exacting definition of someone who is a refugee. You have to go through this processing in a third country through procedures that have not yet been set up, with agreements with other countries that have not yet been established. And so that's a long and difficult one. And it depends on, in the first instance, being referred into the program even for further consideration. There's something called humanitarian parole. That's basically the authority of the United States to physically tolerate your presence in the United States, even if you don't have access to another more regular immigration status or method of getting into the country. It's usually an authority that the government is relatively stingy about exercising. In this instance, I think it's becoming, there's an emerging clarity that the US government plans to exercise this parole authority very flexibly to get people, when they can, out of danger and into the United States. But that still leaves the point that parole itself is not a sturdy immigration status, and you've got to figure out what's going to follow from parole. Parole is basically to get you in here so that you can get to safety and immediate term stability. But those people who are paroled in need to figure out whether or not they've got access, depending on their circumstances, to the SIV process, or more likely into the U.S. asylum process, itself a long and complex and uncertain process that depends again on your qualifying as a refugee. But if you do get through that pipeline, then you have again a very sturdy basis to be in the U.S. permanently, to bring family members to work, etc. There's also family-based options for people who have a qualifying family member who might petition on their behalf in the U.S. The bottom line is, it's important to see the map of the terrain ahead of you as an immigration matter. And it's strategically important, especially for those people who remain in Afghanistan and who are at risk because of their tie to the US entity, to jump into those lines as quickly as possible and to figure out whether there are more lines than one that you can get in at one time. There's no reason you can't do that, and it's actually strategically quite important to do that where possible. Let me stop there and leave time for others who have equally or more important topics to get to. But I appreciate the chance to introduce some of those immigration concepts and considerations. It's important to attend to them now.
All right, let's go back to, let's back up a little bit. Jeremiah has rejoined us. Jeremiah, can you talk about continuing in-country operations for those who wish to stay?
Sure. And to be certain, there are many humanitarian aid organizations who had operations in Afghanistan prior to the Taliban, 2001 and the events there, and that have continued to operate in areas under Taliban control over the many years. And there are many organizations that are planning on staying with a full force of staff. And many of those organizations, local staff, actually view their continued work as a means of ensuring their safety and security, because the Taliban can value what they're doing for the people of Afghanistan. And there's been indications from the Taliban for a number of organizations that they're okay to continue operating. So continued humanitarian aid operations in particular is going to be a significant topic, and how organizations go about doing that is obviously incredibly important. So a few things for organizations to keep in mind who are going to continue operating. I think first, if you're doing development work or working under foreign assistance programs that run through multilaterals, I think we can expect the U.S. government to pause that work, potentially terminate it, but I'm expecting that there'll be a pause, and that this humanitarian assistance will continue from a donor perspective. The first sort of critical issue is money transfers going forward, and we know that in other countries where a sanctioned or designated terrorist organization takes control, the international banking system de-risks that country and its financial system quite quickly. And that's regardless of narrow exceptions that might apply. And I expect over the coming days, weeks, and months, unless the U.S. government really clarifies its sanctions position, that it will be very difficult for any organization to transfer money in or out of Afghanistan without using sort of contingency plans that rely on informal money transfer networks, or potentially routing money through places like Pakistan, if you can gain a bank account there. So any organization planning to operate should be very quickly looking at the contingency plans for moving money in and out of the country. The other issue is, of course, looking at all the compliance requirements that go along with international donor funds that can now raise very significant safety and security risks for team members. For example, USAID's partner vetting program in Afghanistan, or counterterrorism certifications, or sort of the due diligence that takes place, can now really put an organization at somewhat significant risk and its staff of being seen as continuing to collude with Western governments in Afghanistan. So taking a close look at that from a safety and security perspective. And very related, obviously, is that safety and security as any high-risk environment needs to remain front and center on an organization's mind. And any organization that doesn't have sort of sophisticated capabilities around how they manage safety and security in Afghanistan should really consider, pulling up roots, because this is going to be critically important going forward. And having teams on the ground with very up-to-date access to the most relevant information, coordinating with other and putting in place a really careful risk analysis, making decisions proactively is really going to be important. And one thing I really suggest for any organization that's going to continue operating is that they are in very close contact with other organizations to understand how the Taliban is interacting with everyone. So you can plan ahead, and one organization can learn from another. And groups like INZO in Afghanistan have always been helpful, but critically important now. So if you're in Afghanistan, you're on an island, your team isn't communicating regularly with safety and security team members from other organizations, that's not the position you really want to be in at all. And then organizations should be also thinking about how they're communicating together as a group with the Taliban. I think I can go ahead and move on to the critical underlying issue here, which is the sanctions piece. So underlying so much of both the safety and security risks, the operational risks, is the U.S. government sanctions against the Taliban. I think most people understand that the Taliban is a specially designated terrorist organization. And that means that providing them with money, services, really anything of value, whether it's direct or indirect, through your subcontractors, through vendors, through really anyone, violates the global terrorism sanctions regulations, creates potential criminal penalties, OFAC fines, whatnot. And there really are no applicable exceptions. And over the years, there's been much debate over whether things like ransom payments or facilitation payments might be okay. The government has clarified over the years that legally those things are not allowed. Whether in practice there's room to have discussions with the government on those things is very fact specific. And right now, there's one of the biggest issues out there is whether or not the government of Afghanistan itself will be considered subject to the SDGT sanctions that apply to the Taliban. And we're working closely with really the key players across government on this issue. And what we're hearing now is that the government is leaving the de facto policy in place, which means that the Taliban itself is subject to the sanctions, but the government of Afghanistan is actually not. And I think there's an effort to sort of see how things play out as they take control, how they form a government, and then make decisions on future sanctions in a way that leverages that influence to accomplish Western goals, including protecting civilians who want to leave Afghanistan, women, and ensuring compliance with international law. That's significant because obviously if the government of Afghanistan does fall under the SDGT sanctions and paying taxes, standard permit fees, working with the government of Afghanistan, providing food, medicine, what have you, could potentially violate the sanctions, and that really drives everything to a complete halt. So you're starting to see media coverage around the concerns there. In order to continue operating, I think many organizations are currently asking for an OFAC general license that would cover humanitarian assistance. We know that's in the works, but we also know it's incredibly narrowly tailored and would only cover humanitarian assistance. So if you're doing any other types of development programming, that license would not apply. And it's still in flux. We're working with Treasury and others to make sure there's clarification that leaves as much room as possible for aid and development operations to continue. I think any organization right now should consider specific licenses and license applications with OFAC. Each organization needs to go independently to OFAC and apply for those licenses. And part of the confusion that exists is even though the government of Afghanistan is not itself subject to sanctions, the way the Taliban exercises control, it will be hard for organizations to conduct proper due diligence to know if they're providing funds to the Taliban. And the other issue is the Taliban actually has run for quite some time a very effective, in some cases, shadow government in areas that it's controlled. And now an organization may find itself actually communicating with the government of Afghanistan and then the shadow government and confused over which one has the ability to direct its activities and sort of engage in standard government transactions. So many organizations are actually right now seeking specific licenses to deal with those issues. And then, as I said before, as you think about
2 slides.
As you think about compliance with the sanctions regime and the requirements, again, it's always incredibly important to be aware of the safety and security implications that go along with those. And thinking about USAID mandatory counterterrorism certifications, what you do for training, how you communicate around these things, And we do have a lot of expertise in how you set up compliance programs that meet humanitarian principles, meet Western requirements, but are also generally palatable for armed groups, including the Taliban in these areas.
Jeremiah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. Because we're running out of time, let's jump down to insurance. And on that front, we have Mike Kelly. Jeremiah, maybe you could introduce Mike and tell a little bit about how you know him.
Yeah, sure. So Mike has been a great partner for the non-governmental organization and government contractor space working internationally for quite some time. And AHT Insurance Brokers serves, I'd let Mike give the specific number, but in the multiple hundreds of INGO clients and their insurance needs. And I think really has a deep understanding of the insurance issues that go along with operating in these areas and events like the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban. So glad to have him on the call. And with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you to talk about what you're seeing on the insurance side.
Thank you. And for some reason, I'm unable to turn on my camera. So if someone could assist me with that, I would appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction, Jeremiah. And yeah, we have about 150 or so clients broadly engaged in international development. So they're key risk management challenges. And right now, things are very crazy. And I think to kind of talk through the key claims that might arise, the vast majority of them at the moment are around evacuation, related to evacuation. And the really unfortunate thing here is many clients have policies that are willing and able to pay for evacuation right now. Specific policies such as your special risks policy, your kidnap and ransom, has security evacuation coverage. And then there's a variety of other policies such as an international package or business travel accident policy, all of which that would be able to evacuate people. The problem is the major assistance providers that we've discussed are unable to get people out. You know, the international SOSs in the control risks group of the world, because of the extremely limited logistical capabilities and the lack of predictability from what the Taliban is going to do, people are unable to get out. And we're mostly talking, as we discussed before, about local populations of local Afghanis and things along those lines. That coupled with the fact that unless they have some sort of SIV or some sort of special visa, then if they do get out of the country, they're being treated as refugees, which creates an entirely different dilemma in and of itself. So that's what everyone's looking for, or has been looking for the past couple of weeks, is evacuation coverage. As Mitch said, you know, I think we're headed towards the contingency phase there. And so what people are looking for now is, okay, well, we did manage to get our people out. We have a displaced population. How do we provide care for them? And a great example is we've got a governance organization that managed to evacuate their entire 250 Afghani staff, which was 80 employees and then about 170 dependents. Now they've been taken to another country. How do we provide medical care for them? You know, if somebody has a significant medical issue, we know they're not going to be able to come out of pocket with currency. So can we get an insurance policy in place to make sure that the people can get adequate medical care? So those are a number of the cases that we're working on right now. And policies to look for some sort of medical care would be your travel insurance, which could be your business travel accident, a travel medical policy, a policy and things along those lines. But we are working on placing a number of those short-term medical insurance policies for these populations at the moment, because especially for certain populations, they were never intended to become international travelers. So there might not be any mechanism in place to cover those people right now. And obviously, insurers are incredibly leery to place a policy now because they think they're just buying claims. And obviously, insurers really don't like to buy claims. Best practice right now for brokers and claims handling is, I would say, just to be in constant communication with your broker and to understand specifically what your policy wording and what it may and may not cover. There's a fine note down here about actions of sanctioned organizations. If we're looking at any sort of liability and or property policy, which we will start to look at in the next few weeks, they are very testy as it pertains to the actions of sanctioned governments or war and terrorism. And if there's a specific war and terror exclusion, your insurer could potentially look to exclude coverage entirely. So those are just a few of the items that we're working on with clients right now and the topics that are coming up immediately. I'd be happy to pause and take any questions.
Mike, thanks very much. We didn't get any questions that have come in on this one. We had some related questions earlier that I think were addressed in part, Jeremiah talked about, but thanks for your participation today. And I know we'll have more questions coming in and look forward to an opportunity to partner with you again on more detailed conversations around the insurance issue as it matures over the next days and weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stand by in case something does happen, and apologize on the video. We've got lots of people still working on that. Hopefully we'll get you back in before the program ends. Robert, let's conclude with a brief discussion on the claims, modifications, and terminations. This is an area that we've been working on in the firm for our clients almost since the first days of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The U.S. government has issued a number of formal stop work orders to contractors, similar activities to grantees. And then they said, well, we're not going to tell you anything more, but now's a good time to get out of Afghanistan. Why don't you talk a little bit about the claims, modifications, terminations? That's just a starting point for this. I know we'll have a lot more to say about this over the next couple of days and weeks.
Yeah, one of the biggest problem here is that the government is still trying to figure out what to do themselves. So they're not giving very much direction, and without much direction, that leaves contractors to figure it out by themselves and wonder where they're going to get paid. Some contractors we know have received stop work orders. Some have been told to continue working, whether or not it's feasible for them to actually be working. There are issues with if you do leave the country, are you technically in breach of your contract? Are you, can you claim force majeure? So we expect all sorts of termination issues, all sorts of cost issues with regard to getting people out, where they go, or they could be sent home, etc. Some of you may recall a couple of years ago when Alan was still, kind of running things over at Professional Services Council, and our firm worked together on COVID costs. This was, I guess, a year ago, and we're able to help get Section 3610, which really opened the door for the government paying COVID-related costs that they wouldn't otherwise be required to pay. We're going to try to make the same effort here to do a lobbying effort to make sure that the government will pay costs of related to this situation in Afghanistan. But it's unclear at this point where they're going to. We also have a good question from Bill Spriggs. Will FAR 49201 be helpful in contractors overcoming the handicaps of records destroyed in the Taliban takeover? Document. To the degree that records are destroyed, document the fact that records were destroyed. That'll help later with audits. Create the next best available evidence, which is testimonial evidence in declarations. If you know documents were in your office and you had to abandon those, or were on laptops and the Taliban came in and took the laptops, which they're doing all over the place, to be able to document that what happened to those documents is going to be important. Obviously, saving things to the cloud will be important, but we, unfortunately, over the last 20 years of doing Iraq and Afghanistan claims, we've seen that by and large, unless the government makes a bold move like they did with Section 3610 on COVID relief, it's really up to each contracting officer to decide whether that contractor is entitled to payment under a termination clause, stop work clause, etc. Hopefully the government comes through with a blanket authority and direction to contracting officers to pay, but that remains to be seen. So this is either going to be an enormous backlog of claims, or the government will actually get their act together, put out good instructions, and claims or REAs will be paid quickly. We don't know what the answer is going to be to that yet, but the more you can document, the better off you'll be. I'll pause there, Alan, because I know there's a lot more to be said about that, but I think that covers it for today.
Well, that's great, Robert. I just want to draw the folks' attention to that last, let's go back just to the last bullet there, because it's not too early to engage experienced counsel to help you sort of preserve the options and maximize recovery. Now's the time, even through the chaos, to know what you have, identify it, and begin to prepare. There are strict timetables for submitting claims and dealing with terminations, so people need to worry about that. We'll say more about that later. Others are talking about it, but important here as well. So let's go then to the questions and information. Here's the contact information for Robert, Jeremiah, and myself. We want to thank all of our special guest speakers who participated with us today. Just as a reminder, this full webinar was recorded. We'll make that recording available to everybody who's registered for today, including the slides that we used, the Q&A that both came in before and that I will come in afterwards. You obviously won't be able to use the Zoom platform, but feel free to send the questions in. I want to remind you about the resource centers that we've created, both at the PubK site as well as the one that the Professional Services Council has. If you've got other information you'd like to share, you can feel free to send that into PubK directly or send it into any of us at Nichols-Lew, and we'll make sure that it gets posted. If you're aware of other resource centers that are out there that are tracking information, other firms or other organizations, share that with us, and we'll keep that, we'll post that information as well. And finally, let me come back and remind folks that of the lobbying activities that we already have underway and that we're going to continue cross-sector, across a range of issues, not just on cost recovery, but how do we help out in the current situation. Many of our presenters talked about special needs, and we want to be able to we've captured many of them. We want to be able to capture as many as we can so that we maximize our engagement with the federal agencies as well as with the Congress. So, and both the contractor side as well as the grantee side. As I mentioned at the outset, we've got some additional webinars on specific topics that are in process. So watch them if you're a subscriber to PubK. We thank you for that. Watch the PubK site for additional information, and we'll certainly share that with our client base and with other organizations to encourage as many people as can participate in these webinars. They're all free, and we expect the future ones to be free as well. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Thanks again to our special guest speakers. Thanks to my partners, Robert, Jeremiah, and we appreciate it. Stay safe, stay engaged, and we look forward to seeing you at another PubK and Nichols-Lew webinar. Thanks, and have a great day.